We are standing on the footbridge over the Clatterford. Clatterford, what a wonderful word that is. It just rolls around the tongue. And we are looking into the Buchan Valley, a very large water catchment area whose subsoil is chalk, a medium that holds water like a sponge. And it gives off that water as a steady flow at a spring at Buchan Farm. Our nuclei is born. In the early stages, the nuclei flows through water meadows that's probably unchanged in 1,000 years. And as it reaches us here at Clatterford, it's flowing through a meadow called Courtmead. Courtmead. Now that's a suggestive name, and you can find these suggestive names around quite a number of our villages and towns. And Carysbrook and Newport have certainly got their fair share of it. There's Love Lane, Courtmead, Petticoat Lane, and it gets worse, Bare Arse. Oh, it makes me blush to think what our ancestors got up to. And anyhow, as the waters reach Clatterford, it's joined by a small tributary. Small it might be, but it plays a very important part in our story. That is the tributary running through there, and unfortunately it's running through private ground, so we've got to follow the main road, but we should join up at a ford only a few 100 yards or so ahead of us. In walking the highway we come to four ways. It's a crossroads, and two of those roads are named. One is Miller's Lane and the other is Clatterford Chute. The third arm is a stony, steep lane that would take us to the car park at Carysbrook Castle. The fourth one, which we will take, would take us to Frost Hills and Froglands Farm. But we shall only go about 50 yards and we shall meet up with a ford on our tributary. In the garden that we're standing by, it's probably the largest and one of the oldest walnut trees in the island. It's so old that it bears very, very little fruit now, but it's quite healthy. Here we arrive at a second ford, and it's apparently unnamed, but I always call it a paper mill ford because adjoining it is a meadow known as Paper Mill. And it was on that site about 200 years ago that there was a paper mill. There's no evidence of the building itself, but there are other factors. There is a sluice that gathers the water and they pass noisily through. And a little further on, there's a man-made pond, a backwater, where the raw materials of paper making were soaked. I don't think you can get a picture of the sluice, but we're stood by it and you can certainly hear it. This is where the water from the spring is backtracked and goes into a backwater. We're now here by the spring. There is where the backwater, the water runs back into a man-made pond, and at one time there was a sluice there to keep the raw materials of the paper making in that area. In this area of Froglands, you'll find that the lanes are all bordered by hazel, and if you've got hazel and it's dominant, you can say that lane is at least 500 years old. Leaving the area of the paper mill, to rejoin the Newquay, we've got to travel the full length of Miller's Lane, and we shall rejoin the Newquay in Castle Street. That's our next objective. Having walked the length of Miller's Lane, we again join the Newquay, and the Newquay in Castle Street runs together with the road for a distance of about 40 yards, quite a long ford. Where the Newquay disappears under the footbridge, it is joined by the Carrisbrook Mill stream, the water mill stream, and there's very little water coming down there now. The mill is unused, and so is the former leat. But we shall be looking at that in greater detail very, very shortly. There is a row of houses, and upon that site there was once a brewery. It supplied 6 houses in Newport. It was also, apart from brewery, it also had its own malt house. Let's start at the pond. That's the first we shall meet the Newquay. When the Kents had the mill, they had small boats on the mill pond, and you could hire them. There were 3 types. There were rowing boats, paddle boats and motor boats. And of course, we macho youth always had the motor boats, and we would tear around this pond at about 2 miles an hour. They always had loads of ducks on there, and the ducks laid their eggs in the water, and we used to always put our hands down. It was only about 18 inches, 2 foot of water. We'd get the duck's eggs, put them in your pocket, so really you never cost you anything for the boat. King Alfred's cakes, Dordinias, concentrica. Let's see if I can get one. Those concentric rings are annual rings, and that's how they've grown. That shows you how much they've grown each year, and you can virtually date these King Alfred's cakes by the number of concentric rings. You know that was ash, only found on ash. That's the Newquay itself, and that run on the south side of the mill. But the mill wheel was merely in the Newquay itself, and therefore it was an undershot wheel with very little power. Then they moved the wheel to the north side of the business, and they had to build the mill leat, and that was quite a structure. As you'll see as we go down, you'll see how it rises up several feet to bring the water, so that the mill wheel, it was an overshot. The water went over the top of the mill, and the buckets on the mill wheel filled with water, adding weight and bringing it round. That would be to hold the water, and when they wanted to use the mill, they would open the sluice and let the water flow. Of course. There were toilets in Holyrood Street, and you know, I don't know if the ladies are the same, but the gents have always got a big gap, top and bottom. And across the bottom of the door it said, "Beware of limbo dancers." This is the wheel housing, and the wheel itself there, mill lead had been raised to the point where the water would come over the top of the wheel itself and carry much more weight. If you were to come down Carisbrooke High Street early in the 19th century, let's put a date on it, 1817, when you got to the bottom of the High Street, opposite Spring Lane, you would have come to a ford exactly the same as you see in Castle Street today. It was in 1817 that the Highways Commissioners purchased from Sanders, the farmer down on the corner, a strip of land and moved the ford, which you had to go through with cattle and vehicles, moved it over to the side of the road, and that is the stream you see today. But of course it was so small that it wouldn't accommodate all the water that was coming down there. Good morning. All the water that was coming down there in times of heavy rain. So what they had to do, they had to separate the Dukley, and it's the only place that the Dukley is separated in its entire length. If the water came down and went through the overflow from the mill pond, which you'll go into in a moment, that is the stream that you see going down alongside the road. The water that went through the mill wheel recess was piped underground over to what is now the medical centre. And if you go over there, you can pick up the stream as it runs down. That is on the other side of the road. And it wasn't until it got down to the first house in Carisbrooke Road, Sanford, that the stream running by the side of the road was piped under the road and it joined the other stream, and the Dukley was one again. Of course, Carisbrooke was a beery place, wasn't it? 7 public houses in a small village like Carisbrooke. It's difficult to understand why there were so many, wasn't it? And can I name them? Where the Waverley Public House is today, there was a terrace of cottages, very much like those that's still there today on the opposite side of the road. And one of those was a beer house named the George. And those cottages were demolished, and they built a public house where the Waverley is today, and it was called the Wine Branch Inn. And but that burnt down, and then they built the Waverley on the site. So we're talking there about 3, but we call that one pub. Over by the Lich Gate to the churchyard, that was the Cutter's Arms, that stone building there. Come down the High Street, and on the corner of Castle Street was the Bugle. You come down, and on your left-hand side, where the co-op is today, there were 2 pubs side by side, and now that's unusual to have 2 pubs together. One was the Red Lion, and the other one was originally the Carisbrooke Castle Hotel, but it was known laterally as the Castle Hotel. And then just down the road you had the 8 Bells, which is still there today, and at the bottom of Cedar Hill you had the 3 Blackbirds. What a beery place it must have been. And one strange thing about it, their regulations was different to those in Newport. And Newport pubs closed at 10, but those at Carisbrooke didn't close until 10:30. And people walked up to Carisbrooke to have an extra pint. You can't believe it, can you? It's incredible. People, we called them Beery Manor, Beery Matthews, and there were some wonderful tales about them. Beery Manor used to always go to the Brown Jug in Newport, and it was nothing on a Saturday evening for the police to pick him up, and he was an outside porter from Newport railway station, and what he'd done, he'd get so drunk that the police would go up there and put him on his truck and take him down to the police station so as he could cool off in the cell for the night. There was more character to Newport in those days. You don't quite see that sort of thing today. This is officially the Priory Mill Pond, but most people call it the 8 Bells Pond, and it's probably the oldest pond on the Dukley. For many, many years it was used by the Eight Bells. They had punts on there for fishing. The fish aren't there today, but it was a very popular resort. That was a bakery, and people by the name of Hibbard kept it as a bakery, and of course the flour loft was above the bakery itself, so the vehicle pulled up and the flour was pulled up and into the watch court. There were 3 bakers in Carrisbrook alone, and there was Hibbard's there was Apsall up further just above Castle Street, and Dunn's even further up, which is now a restaurant. As far as shopping was concerned, it was self-contained. They didn't have to come to Newport for anything. There wasn't a population then, and of course without cars people walked, but it wouldn't have ever been crowded, never. You meet old people there, and most people knew each other too. But there you can see the steps going up into the churchyard. That they were always known as the wedding steps. And can you imagine today the vehicles stopping on that corner there, and the bride getting out and going up those steps? It's impossible. That was a boot repairer lived there. Coward his name was. And he had quite a big workshop, and he would go every week to Shorewall and Bryson. He'd take back the boots and the shoes that he'd repaired and pick up any to bring in to do, and that was weekly. So he had quite a round, and he would make quite a fair living like that. This was now the co-op. It was originally the Carrisbrook Castle Hotel, but in latter years it was known as a Castle Hotel. It's a Castle Hotel. But next door to it, which is most unusual for 2 pubs to be adjoining, it was the Red Lion. And of course, their trade came from visitors who came in the 4-horse carriages and that. And in the pictures, you'll see the steps that they put up against the carriages to get the people off the top. There's the milestone over there. That's 1 mile from the Guildhall in Newport, and that terrace of 3 cottages there is and still known as the Mile End Terrace. I don't think it's changed much at all, certainly not in the last century or perhaps a century and a half. If one of our ancestors walked down here a century and a half ago, recognise it immediately. This yew tree, there's a ledger from the old borough of Newport, 16th century, and it's on the front of the ledger. There's a picture of Carrisbrook, St Mary's Church of Carrisbrook, and alongside of it there's a tree, and it's certainly a yew, and I have no doubt it's the same tree today. So we're talking now about 4 centuries, but just how long that's been there could be 7, 8 centuries. It's amazing. And what is important, this one has never been used as a special burial ground. If you go to Freshwater Parish Church, have a look at the yew in the churchyard there, and you'll find beneath it are the more important, I'll put it that way, of residents of the Freshwater Watch Court. And it's people like brigadiers and that sort of thing. But the one that didn't quite make the shade of the tree was Lady Tennyson. Her headstone is just outside the shade of the tree. If you're in Freshwater, it's worth going in to have a look. A hand on the wall. This wall, I'm quite certain, was built from the stonework of the old priory. And the old priory, there was a small number of monks at that priory at the same time as there was a church in Carrisbrook. And when they finally left, and the
priory building was built, knocked down, I'm sure that's a wall. And that stone have got something to do with that. But nobody really understands the history of it. But the children of Carisbrooke years ago always came, put their hand on the wall and make a wish. Whether it was ever granted, I don't know. They were apparently tombs, but they must have been very, very important people to have altered the pattern of the church like that. But again, there's very little known about it. The history of Carisbrooke Church is extremely controversial. It's difficult to know what is fact and what is fiction. It's just, we go around the corner, let's have a look at the tower. If you look up at the tower, there's two figures, and again, nobody's absolutely certain, but they think they were introduced about 1820. But it was probably something to do with the original construction of the tower, which goes back to about 1400. But nobody again knows for certain exactly why those figures were put there. Ditch gates and almost all church cemeteries have got a lich gate, and lich gate is virtually death gate. And if years ago, if you had to look at a lich gate, in the centre of the lich gate there was a stone wall, and it was known as a coffin wall. And there's only one example in the island today, and that's at Protestant Church. And if you go there, you'll find that right in the centre of the lich gate is this stone wall known as the coffin wall. And if you go back far enough, all the mourners would gather from all over the parish, and then they would line up behind this lich gate. The vicar would be in the front. The bearers, which are on both sides of the stone wall, would pick the coffin up, and they would go in procession into the church. And if you're in Motterston, do have a look, and you'll find there that there is an extension to the churchyard, and that again has been repeated. So there's two stone walls there, and they're well worth looking at, because I think there's only about 3 or 4 examples in Britain. Oh yeah, well, we used to go up there catching butterflies. We had a net, very much like a little fishing rod you fish with, and you whip them up, you know, and catch butterflies. But that was part of our pastime in those times. That superb entrance to the church, it's probably original from when the church was built, and when you just look at it, it's an absolute superb piece of structure. And if you look at the roof of the church there. Well, we're in the churchyard of St Mary's at Carisbrooke, and this little lane here will take us through to what is known as Carisbrooke Priory Pond. And the Priory Farm itself was 160 acres, and you've got pictures of haymaking on there about the time of the First World War. This is the Priory Farm Pond, not the Priory Mill Pond. That is the one, of course, at the bottom of Carisbrooke High Street. But people do confuse it. They think this is the Priory Pond. It's not. Of course, nearly all farms had a pond for the water for the cattle. Nearly all medieval ponds. And of course, there's the original Priory farmhouse. Difficult to see where he's grown in so much. The farm itself was about 160 acres. This, of course, is the footpath that you can take today right into Newport, and not be bothered by all the traffic of the main road. And it's surprising how many people use it to get into Newport or back to Carisbrooke. And it's the Lukeley, following the Lukeley, makes a lovely, peaceful walk. What was the medical centre was a nunnery.
there were nuns there, and they had quite a piece of ground. I think they still own it, and it's a great shame that it's not used by the public. It's just wasteful. We are now passing the truncated end of Westmill Pond. Westmill Pond was 4 acres in extent, and it was truncated by building Wellington Road across it. And today, what can we describe it as? An area of woodland, I suppose, of willow carr, something of that nature. But it's quite acceptable when you look at it. But it's dry because the Nuckley stream itself has been put in a very, very deep channel, which we shall see in a moment. On our left is Christ the King College, and that stands on the grounds of the former Priory Farm, of which, of course, you will see scenes from a century ago of harvesting. This is the western tip of the Westmill Pond, and it's dry because they've put the Nuckley into a deep channel, effectively draining it. Wellington Road, but we shall have to go down almost to the junction with Carrisbrook Road to meet up with the Nuckley. It's only a few yards. The southern edge of the mill pond has been infilled and houses built on the southern end, but it still leaves a large portion that we should pass. Let's go over, shall we? By putting the Nuckley in this so deep a channel, it's absolutely drained the former mill pond. This was a beautiful area, 4 acres of it, and it was a reed fringed pond, and the swallows and the martins used to come across the surface there, picking up the insects. There was moor hens, reed and sedge warblers nesting in the reeds. It was a piece of heaven in Newport. After the last war, say the 1950s, that began. It belonged to an oil company, and they had a garage on the corner there, and they just wouldn't let anybody do anything with it. That was a great pity. If only we could have had that pond today. It would have been a marvellous asset in the town. It was by far the largest mill pond on the Nuckley. And today you see it's dry, it's derelict, and so much could be done with it. Walking down here you'll get some idea of the size of that pond. It's still wet in places, but in the last half century this have all grown up. Otherwise this was a pond. What a shame, isn't it? This was a lovely little stream at one time, but owing to a dispute they planted these conifers there to divide it between two owners. That wooden clad building was originally the Rack Close Dairy. So you can see that there was fields around here. There's a fish ladder. Scoring on the wall where the mill wheel was. There we are at the junction of Wilver and Caesars Road, and we meet up again with the Lukeley as it flows beneath the road itself. You could pass in a car and not realise it's here, couldn't you? Here we have just a little bit of the original Lukeley. Look at it. Actually, if we were stood by these trees, the Westminster Pond would be on our left. And as we walked in, you'll be walking up this path that you still can walk up today, but it's a road, and look across the Mill Pond, and you'll be looking at Caesars Mead. And this is 1895. Within a decade, Caesars Road was built on that field. That's the Westminster Mill, and if we were to come in that side, we'd be looking across the pond. Beautiful, isn't it? And there we are, we're virtually stood at this point, looking down towards the Westminster Mill. That was a bone mill. And when it was actually boiling the bones, you could smell it all across Newport. Difficult to believe that we're walking along that was once a path by the side of the pond. Look at it today. Wooden extension on the front of the building is called a lucum, L-U-C-A-M, and its purpose was that you brought the material for the mill in there, and then it was hoisted. The mill's process started at the top of the building and it had to go down. If you had a 208.5 sack of wheat, you poured it up, and if you look underneath, you could see an inch flaps, two flaps that was hinged, and as the sack went up, it lifted the flaps like that, and as soon as the sack passed, they dropped back. You could lower the sack onto it and truck it away, 2.5 underweight. It was just ordinary banks of the stream, and it ran down through there. And none of this was here, of course. It was just virtually running through a field. On the bottom of the Mill Street, and on this corner of Westminster Lane stood the home mill, and it had a mill pond originally, but the waters from the Westminster Mill ran almost immediately into the mill pond of the home mill, and there's, funnily enough, there's very little known about it, nothing much written, and but we do know that in 1800 it was known as Hearn's Mill, and we've got a Hearn Street there. There's got to be a connection with it somewhere, but other than that, there's very little you can say about Home Mill. So something had its clothes on. There's a huge buttress there, if you look at it. It was obviously a stone building here, and there was a cleat there that kept a window or a door open. But I don't know what that was about. But there was obviously a stone building, probably a barn or something of that nature, stood on that site. This is the Towngate Pond. It was never a mill pond. It was the water had already passed Towngate Mill, and it would have to run under the bridge before it went into the St Cross Mill. But in 1533, Newport started a regular livestock market. But for 3 centuries after that date, there was no piped water in Newport. All the water available was from wells, and even they ran dry in warm summers, and water was brought in from Carrisbrook. No matter where you come into Newport, there's access to water. Coming in, you give the animals a drink, and going out, you would also give the animals a drink. The Lukeley, the pathway is still running down there now, but the mill pond was alongside of the stream. Not the Lukeley didn't run into it and run out at the other end. It was alongside, and there was a wall, a stone wall, and there were ports in that wall where the water could run from the stream into the mill pond, and that would prevent large pieces of wood or anything else that might damage the mill wheel. And that was quite unique. And the depth of that water was, I think, somewhere about 9 or 10 feet. Favourite place for suicides in Newport. No, it was filled in before my time, but they filled it in, and of course put in this concrete channel, that was done after the flooding in 1960. You can see where there's a bridge over there where they go over there's a garden now, but that was originally the pond. And of course the Lukeley didn't flow through the pond, it flowed alongside of it, which was unique on the Lukeley. Lukeley come down through there. This has all been built up, of course. The Highways Commissioners, who came into being in 1813, one of their earliest tasks was to lower the hill, and they took 9 feet off the top of that hill. And at that time, of course, there would have been no buildings whatsoever. Probably the vicarage to St Thomas's, which was on the hill here, that might have been there, but that was well back from the hill. If you go up the hill now, and you'll find that there's a road comes in off the left, and it comes in so steep. But if you can imagine 9 feet taken off that, it wouldn't have been. And to remove all that spoil, they got the able-bodied people from the workhouse, the men, and they did have a choice. They could have a wheelbarrow, a single wheel, or they could have a barrow with 2 wheels, and they carted all that spoil down to Dodmer Lane. We're coming up now to the St Cross Mill Pond. Cross Mill Pond would have been much larger, would have come right back, and of course it was infilled here to build the viaduct to carry the freshwater train. And beyond that, there's little I can say about the actual area. That was Muir Langton's mineral water factory, and you'll see a picture of the end washed out. Of course, if you had come down any hill from the north of the island, prior to 1400, there was no bridge at all. It was a ford. And you would have to come round on a footpath, right round here, and pick up this footpath here. This is one of the oldest bits of Newport that you still walk. It was rebuilt in 1402, but I don't think this is the building. I think it's been rebuilt since that. What would you say this was, 1600? This is the Muir Langton site. They were brewers, and very, very big brewers at that. They had over 100 houses, and where we're standing, the barrel store was here. And here, the Lukeley, from here down to the quay, the Lukeley is a canal, and they had small boats, lighters, and the barrel beer used to be loaded onto those swatchcourts and taken down to the Cross Solent ship in the Medina. Where we are standing at present was originally the station approach. That's where you went up to the Newport railway station, just up the top. It was a very busy street at that time, not people coming and going. Public house on the corner of C Street has retained its name, the Medina Railway Tavern. Of course, originally the Newport Quay extended the entire length of C Street, and at both ends there were open courtyards, and I think you can still see there Coal Wharf. There was a brewery, and I think it was about 1806 and 1808, and they had a vat there where the beer was chilling, but it had been dry for about 3 or 4 months, and they were going to clean it out. 2 men went down and they were asphyxiated, but how that come about I don't know, and they got them out but they couldn't save them. In 1800 there was only one obstruction. As you come into Little London there was a footpath, and there was just a footbridge over this canal. None of these buildings span that river. All the way up here on the left hand side from where we're looking was warehouses, and of course these small boats could go right up there and discharge their cargoes. Of course, it's changed so dramatically. Ponds have been filled in, but if you're going to walk from Newport to Carriagebrook, do follow the Lukeley up. You'll find that it's a very, very pleasant walk, devoid of cars and everything else, and it makes a lovely walk. And I do suggest that anybody walking from Newport, even if they're going to Carriagebrook Castle, to follow the Lukeley up, and they will enjoy it. There's so much to see, and I'm hoping you will get that from the film.